Okay. So today on Kindled, I'm chatting with Cindy Rollins. Cindy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited about this.
Me too. I have known who you were for a couple years because when I first started homeschooling a little over, well, almost 2 years ago, actually, a friend, I was looking into what books do I need to read to prepare. We were pulling our kids from private school and I had a bunch of books that I was, starting and listening on Audible. And a friend said, those are all okay, but you need to just put Cindy Rollins' Mere Motherhood at the top of your list, I promise you. She was like, "You've gotta start there." And, and I did, and I absolutely loved it, appreciate your work so much, and, have been really blessed by it. So thank you for writing.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I love helping young moms, and I love people coming to homeschooling and getting on a good footing philosophically right in the very beginning. It
Yeah,
saves a lot of trouble.
totally. Yes, it does. So much of it is, like, your approach and your mindset around what you're doing, what the end
Right.
goal is. So, yeah, before we hop into, all of the questions I have for you, if you could just share with people a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so right now I had 9 children, so I'm getting ready for Thanksgiving right now. We're going to have our family Thanksgiving. We homeschooled them all the way through. My youngest son did go to school for 4 years at the end cuz it was just going to be me and him alone, and we kind of had a boys school cuz we had 8 boys. So it was like private boys school for years, very masculine, very physical, and then it was just gonna be this young boy with me. But that worked out well. The Lord had his hand in it. I've seen so many answers to prayers about dealing with our children as individuals, as Charlotte Mason would say. But now all my kids are grown, everybody's out of the house, and my husband is retired. And I have a Patreon where I do a lot of discipleship stuff on my Patreon. That's where I put my heart and soul at this point in time. But
Mhm.
we also have the new Mason Jar podcast.
Okay. That's awesome. So tell us why, anyone that I guess wants to get your full story should definitely read your book, but what was your kind of motivating drive to want to homeschool? Because I think that's noteworthy that you went all the way from the start. I mean, some of us find our way there eventually, as in my case, but you seem to have kind of always known that was going to be your path. And why were you so convicted of that?
Well, I went to public school in Florida in the late '70s, and I love to read, but I just got because I read a lot, I would hear things that people were new, like reading Little Women. You hear about these books, Pilgrim's Progress, all this stuff, and I felt so stupid because I didn't even know what that stuff was, and I realized that my education had let me down. So originally, I really didn't start homeschooling out of fear, but kind of out of the arrogant youth of thinking I could do better than this. And I heard about homeschooling on a radio program, and a lot of people of my generation actually heard that same radio program. And it was a 15-minute show. It clicked with a lot of us, and a lot of us thought we can do this. And we started then early. We were just going to delay schooling, but by the time we got going, we knew that that's what we wanted to do. And then by the time I had my 4th son was a baby, I heard about Charlotte Mason and started reading about her. So my oldest was 6, 5 or 6 at that time.
What about Charlotte Mason homeschooling drew you in, made you, excited to pursue that route?
Well, if you've ever read For the Children's Sake, which is Susan Schaefer Macaulay's book, in a way it's a little bit dated. In a way, it is such a beautiful it just painted this picture. And it was exactly what I was looking for, even though I didn't know that. And once I read that, I was like, "This is what I want." And that's kind of what I wanted Mere Motherhood to be. I wanted it to be a picture, like, not so people could copy it everything I did, but so that they would have a vision for what homeschooling could be.
Yes, I loved that book. That was actually one of the first few books I read as well. And just painted such a great picture for why homeschooling and why that approach, the Charlotte Mason approach. So when people say Charlotte Mason, I realize not everyone listening may be familiar with that. Could you kind of give us just like the high level overview? What does that mean?
Yeah, so Charlotte Mason was an educator that lived in England. She died in 1920. She started a school for teachers, many of them homeschooled or were nannies. They went out from there, and she highly encouraged home education for families at that period in time, and they had a lot of support materials. But over the course of many years, she developed a philosophy of education, which she lays out in her final volume, volume 6, Towards a Philosophy of Education. That's kind of like her manifesto. And basically, she has 20 principles. And the first principle, some of them are more key than others. And the very first principle, children are born persons. She has education is the science of relations. That means we are in relationship with the knowledge we're learning. And that is going to hook up to our minds in different ways, so that what I take out of something might be different than what you take out of it. But we're both going to this is why worksheets are not that helpful. They're telling us that we're all going to learn the same thing, but we all don't have the same hooks and stuff in our mind. Our minds aren't always working the same way. So
Right.
Charlotte acknowledged that children are born persons. She didn't mean that education was child-centered by that. She meant that we should not underestimate children and their abilities, that we should see that they're capable and able to feed off of ideas because they're made in the image of God, just like we are. And what happens? We feed on ideas, and then we take those ideas, and those ideas have consequences. And that's kind of a creative process. So
Right.
the science of relations, children are born persons, and the habit of attention is another one. We only learn what we pay attention to. And when we realize that, you start to see it makes sense of a lot of things. And much of her philosophy is helping us to develop our attention spans through nature study, through narration, and different things like that. So that's kind of a Charlotte Mason in a very tiny nutshell.
Right. Okay. And so, and one of the things I like about this is putting you with the Charlotte Mason approach is putting you in direct interaction with source materials. So
Yes.
rather than like reading an overview of history, not that that's wrong or you could never do that. And we do that in our homeschool. We do one of those books that's kind of like more of an overview or a survey, I guess. The emphasis is to read like source books written in that time period to learn about that time period, right?
Yes, that way that's where you get to the point that we have to trust that our children are able to understand and go after these harder things, and not just water everything down or dumb everything down because we think they aren't able.
Right, right. And so in doing that, I think it's noteworthy that you had 8 boys and 1 girl, right? Because I do hear a lot from homeschool moms, right? I feel like it's kind of a common stereotype that boys are harder to homeschool. I've been told that. I have 4 girls, and so I've been told, "Oh, homeschooling is a natural fit because your girls like sitting and coloring and writing and reading, and my boys are just there's no way." Like, I've been told that. So, it's interesting to me that you had almost all boys. Can you kind of speak to that stereotype of how homeschooling works best for a certain gender or, a certain type of child, and that certain children could never do it for one reason or another?
Totally don't agree with that. I mean, boys are, if you found that the people that struggle the most with boys are the ones who have girls first and then they have boys. If you have boys first, you kind of get used to this rambunctiousness of physical touching that the girls don't have. But the thing is, say we have an option of homeschooling our boys and working with them the way God made them, or putting them in a school that sometimes drugs them, sometimes locks them, tries to cram this masculine energy into a box. And is that really a solution to this problem that for mom who is feminine is now homeschooling boys? And what is she going to do? Well, you're going to have to allow that they are physical creatures, and that they need to use their energy, and you can build that into your day very, very easily by just, if someone's acting up, or you can have them run around, you can have the when we read aloud, I let the boys play with Legos. I didn't make everybody just sit in a quiet little box. I let them move, and you would not believe the things that they can remember when it just looks like they're not paying the least bit of attention. And they are. They are. Those ideas are going into their head. So when we acknowledge their differences and we respect that and we see it as a good thing and not a bad thing, then we can start. Now, this, we don't make allowances for them like, oh, they can't do this because they're a boy or they can't do this because they're a girl. We don't dumb things down for either boys or girls, but we don't expect them, what is the phrase people are using now that boys are just defective girls?
Wow.
Our society looks at boys as defective girls. So
Yeah.
moms, we're so feminized in our culture that we sometimes don't realize that that is how we're looking at our boys, and we don't understand them. So as they
And
get
even our
old,
education system
yes,
is feminized, right? Because it's like you were describing the worksheets and the order and the like, I actually like that kind of thing a lot of times, I don't mind. I
yes,
mean, my
of
girls
course,
love that. They're like, "I wanna fill in the next line. I wanna fill in the right box. I wanna get everything." That's a feminine, and not even to mention the fact that most teachers are women.
right? Right. So their boys are put in this feminine environment wherever they go. So homeschooling is a way to escape from that for the boys and let them be in a masculine environment. Let them work with their hands. Let them, Charlotte Mason talks about handcrafts. Well, that could include sawing and hammering and all kinds of physical activities that your boys can do, getting outside, doing nature study, and getting them eventually as they grow older. They're gonna be pushing against mom because, mom's over here sometimes moralizing. That's something I talk about a lot. Like, we don't want to turn everything into a spiritual lesson with our boys or our girls because we deaden them. It's like vaccinating them or inoculating them against truth. We want them to hear truth, so we don't just pour it on thick every single day. We read God's word, but we let it speak for itself. It's not just mom's opinion all the time about God's word. And as they get a little bit older and they start pushing against mom, we can start looking for outside sources that are still homeschoolings that help them to be around other men, to see how men work, maybe have some apprenticeship sessions going on. There's just so many different ways that we can acknowledge that they need to. I always say a boy needs to see that the mom is going to let him out of the homeschool mom fantasy world. If he
Mm,
thinks it's very hard for boys. They want to know, how am I going to do in the real world? And they can get very afraid that they're not being prepared. One of my sons was like that. He felt like he wasn't prepared for the real world, and he got a job, and he went and got this job. He actually got a job at Chick-fil-A, and he came home and he said, "Oh, I feel so much better." He said, "These kids, they don't know the things that I know, and I feel like I'm going to be okay." And he needed
mhm.
that. He needed to find out. And these were smart kids. These weren't.
Yeah.
So anyway, so we need to let our boys we need to adapt to that, but we also know that we actually have the ability to adapt our environment to them much better than these systems.
Let me pause and tell you about one of my favorite sponsors, and that is Unsifted. Now, if you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen me using their products in my baking and cooking, but this is fresh milled flour. Now, before you think that's just too crunchy or way over your head, I promise you it's not. If I can do it, you can do it. I have been using fresh milled flour for almost a year now, and I absolutely love having this as a tool in my family's health arsenal. And here's why: because unsifted fresh milled flour has 40 out of the 44 key essential nutrients and active enzymes that our bodies need to properly digest gluten and even function on a daily basis. So you have heard that gluten is the bad guy in the bread, right? But it's actually not. It is the processing of the flour that makes the gluten difficult for our bodies to handle. But fresh milled flour contains all of the enzymes that are needed to process and digest the gluten properly. It's almost like the way that God made grain. It was actually intentional. But the Unsifted starter kit is the ultimate easy button for fresh flour baking, and it has everything you need: the high quality grain blends, easy to follow recipe cards, and the Wonder Mill, a super fast mill giving you a high quality flour in seconds. Go to unsifted.com to order your Unsifted starter kit today. Use code Kindled10 for $10 off your first order of $100 or more. That's code Kindled10 at unsifted.com. Yeah, that's true. I think the challenge really is adapting ourselves, because it's like our expectations. And that's every single day for me in my home and in our school. And I was telling you before you hit record this, that, with a little toddler, that's proving to really push me out of that honeymoon phase of homeschooling that I was in for the first year and a half pretty quickly. And, the rubber hits the road and the baby is, clawing to get up, and you're trying to read, and you're like, I've got to deal with this immediate need, but then I'm abandoning my other kids in here, and the 6-year-old doesn't know what the math book is asking of her. And that's where homeschooling gets real, right? And you obviously lived that, 8 times over.
Yeah.
So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but what did you find that helped you in that season? Because I know a lot of my followers are moms with little kids that are homeschooling, maybe a kindergartner or up to a 4th grader, 5th grader, as I am, and are trying to make this work with multiple ages. So what's your wisdom for that season?
Well, I always joke that no one's ever answered the problem, "What do you do with your toddler?" The closest thing to an answer I ever found was food. Throw food at them. That works a little bit, but also, like, in hindsight, what I see is what we have in homeschooling, especially when we're, like, using these good books, these older books, these rich language. We are kind of giving our children this very, very rich education. And if it doesn't come across like a school where the train just keeps moving no matter what, it doesn't matter. Like, looking back, I can see all the times I was interrupted, like, almost every day. As a matter of fact, I can say I probably have more bad days than good days, just trying to keep it all together. But one of the things I try to talk to moms about is plotting. We just don't quit. We keep going. We plod. Well, we read our Bible verse. We got interrupted. We wanted to sing a song together, but we didn't. But you know what? It's okay. So it's almost lunch, but let's go ahead and sing our song together. Let's go ahead and do what we can do. No, you can throw up your hands and say, well, this day is ruined because it feels like it. Or you can just do what you can do during that day and not worry about it. I mean, you should not be going to bed and thinking of all the things you didn't get done. You should be thinking of all the things you did get done. And those little things over many long years, one song, one poem, one math problem at a time, add up to a life, which is what Charlotte Mason says our education is. It's not just a report card. It's not a credit on an application, but they add up in this world of homeschooling, but they add up in the real world in ways that turn out to be surprising. You think, really? Can this hodgepodge of days add up to an education? Yes, it can.
Wow. Yeah, that's so encouraging. I needed that message today and yesterday. Yesterday we just kind of went off script and was like, let's go run some errands in the morning because the baby's going to be awake for a while and we've got a window. And then it was nice out and we went to the park and we got home and then she took a nap and I had to get some things done. And then, by the time you know it, it's almost dinner and we've done almost no school. And that doesn't happen very often for us, but that happened yesterday. And I kind of was like, man, these kids, like, they didn't do anything today. And it was actually about 45 minutes before bedtime when they were kind of listless. And my kids actually do better on the days we do school. Like, they just are better with some structure and some learning and some things to
Right.
do, some jobs. And they were kind of arguing and bickering about, well, what are we going to do? Let's play Legos. No, let's do this. Let's do that. And I just was like, nope, we're going to do our worldview lesson because we usually do our worldview curriculum on Thursdays and we hadn't done it. We got it open, did it. Took about 30 or 40 minutes, but I saw, not only did they like engage with it, it was a review of the unit that we had been studying for the last month or so. I was amazed by their recall of some of the things we've talked about that night. And it was almost like, not that you would do this every day, of course, that's not what I'm saying, but just when you are discouraged and you do exactly what you just said, you plod. I feel like God is actually really gracious to give you that encouragement that you need. Like, yeah, I didn't get all of our stuff done and we can't do that again tomorrow, but today there was grace for today. And he, was able to, or he was gracious to show me that like it is not for nothing and that there is so much that's being taught and so much that's being learned. And my kids did a worldview map of Islam and new spirituality and postmodernism and naturalism and know things at 9 and 11 that I learned in the last 5 years. So I was just really encouraged by that. And maybe that's kind of what you're talking about with the plotting. It's like, yeah, we might have not gotten to it until right before bed, but that didn't mean that because a window opened up that I shouldn't just go ahead and take it. Like take the window, that's available.
That's the perfect illustration for what I was saying, and I also say make hay while the sun shines, so you have some good days, you string them together, and then you have some bad days, and you just do what you can do during those days, but that will all add up. So if you have good days, take advantage of them, but if you don't, do that, and that's a perfect illustration.
Yeah, that's encouraging. So I want to go back to one thing you talked about, and that was the moralizing, because this is actually something I really struggle with and I tend to do too much. So how do you not do that? Because I feel like I'm always wanting my kid to get the bigger picture. And they're actually really deep girls, intellectual girls who think on a pretty deep level for their ages. So it's not that I need to or they won't get it, but it's like I feel like I haven't finished the sentence or haven't finished my point of the lesson unless I kind of put that bow on it that you're talking about. So give me an example of like how you would just what is a situation where you would see an opportunity to moralize or to over spiritualize something, or maybe it's not even over spiritualize, just turning it all into a
Spiritually.
spiritual lesson. It's all everything is a lesson. I could see that getting really annoying as a kid, and so I don't want to be annoying to my kids, but at the same time recognizing like nothing is neutral, right? And so
Right,
how
right.
do I what does that look like?
So it is because these things are so important. It's not they're not important, so we don't do them. It's because they're important that we don't want to cause our children to turn our voices off and not listen and not hear, especially God's word. We don't want our voice yakking in their ear the rest of their life when they pick up their Bibles. It kind of seems weird when your kids are young because you don't see that big picture of there's my voice in their head every time and I used to be the worst moralizer. This is how I know. And then one day I looked up and it was just like glazed over eyes, the whole family, all the boys, so to speak. My daughter, she was much more attentive, but it turned out that that was not they were not and then they were not listening anymore, and I was not letting God's word speak for itself and do its own work. I wasn't trusting that I'm giving them really good books, I'm giving them really good ideas, I'm showing them, good ideas and bad ideas, like we read the Communist Manifesto and we read, the Constitution of the United States of America, and I don't have to moralize those things or get my point across because they can because their minds are also working, they begin to work on those things on their own. Now, if you have a child ask you a question, let open go, keep going, tell 'em,
Mhm.
have the conversation with them, but be very, very careful. When they're real little, they're hanging on every word you say, and that's so great. I miss those days so much, where whatever you said, "Mom," one time my kids were like, "My mom said that was a sin against God." It was just something I look back and I'm like, "I'm pretty sure I didn't say that," but they thought I had said it. Those are great days, but those are not what is gonna happen as they reach 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So we need to, at those ages, really pull back, but make sure we're reading God's word. Make sure they're getting that in their heart. That's where we want it, in their heart, because when they have the Holy Spirit, if they're Christians, then He has all that available to use the rest of their lives in their heart. Not your voice, but His voice.
So good. So, one question that I have for you is around the subject of history. And we mentioned this a little bit, but as a newer homeschool mom, even though I was homeschooled myself, it's very, very different being on the mom side of the equation and, curriculum overwhelm and all of that, those questions of, well, what do we read and when do we do this? So, with history is something that I find to be maybe one of the more challenging subjects because it's like, do we do an overview of history? We've got different ages. I know we're gonna have to come back through it again later, even if we do that overview. Or do I just start reading source materials from a certain period and we're just in that period of time and we move forward? What would be your thoughts there? Because I do have, well, I just so you know, and of course the mom listening is gonna have lots of different ages, but like 11, 9, 6 are the ages that I'm trying to reach. So it's nobody would really probably think a 6-year-old needs to be doing history, right? But she's along for the ride of whatever the big kids
Right,
are doing.
right. Oh, I would say so. She's gonna enjoy reading the books. I mean,
Mhm.
whatever you can read aloud as a group, that's great. I mean, anytime you're with your family and you're reading aloud and you have a history, like I just didn't stress about history periods. I did at first because everybody in the homeschool world was like, there's these 4 periods and you start with the ancients and you go to this, this, this. And then all my kids were in different levels, obviously. At one point, I think I had I homeschooled 7 at the same time. And I started doing, each of them would be reading whatever was on their reading list for whatever time period they happened to be in. And I used a lot of Ambleside online suggestions. And then, but we would do the spine books in morning time together. So we might be doing a spine, and I might have 2 periods of history going in morning time at the same time. We might be reading English literature for boys and girls or, Our Island Story and an American history, this country of ours at the same time. That's the whole science of relations. Your kids are starting to make relationships with different periods of time, and they'll see things and you'll see things that you never dreamed of because you're doing these different time periods. I don't really think any of that matters.
You don't?
If you
Okay.
have a book of the century, you can kinda like, at the end of the week, you can sit down on Friday and say, "Well, we learned about John Smith. He goes here, but we learned about Beethoven. He goes here." Or, "We learned about, Julius Caesar. We read a story. There was Julius Caesar in the story." And you can put it in your book of the centuries, and that kinda brings it all together. But I think people stress a lot about history. I think we should read lots of books, lots of history, lots of primary source documents. And, I think one of the mistakes a lot of homeschoolers make is that we think of historical fiction as, a history curriculum, when it's really just, it's a helpful, fun thing to read, but it's not necessarily part of of how we're learning history. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's just a fun book.
Yeah, okay, that's helpful. So don't stress about it, just read good books.
Yes, there you go.
So the framework would then kind of be implanted on later on top of the knowledge that they have learned. So that is, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's kind of the opposite of like the classical approach. Is that true?
Right. Yes, if you're calling classical approach what people nowadays call classical approach.
Nowadays. Sure.
Yeah, so the classical like, what we have now what classical education is right now in America and especially in, homeschooling circles a lot of times is very just progressive education repackaged for, because it's in boxes, it's systematic, it's not living, so to speak. It's focused on regurgitation, that sort of thing. So it's not really like a classical education from the past where, John Quincy Adams is sitting at home and his dad gives him these books to read and think about, and he's discussing them with somebody. That's a totally different kind of education. And there's no way to, if it's in a box, it's not classical education. There's no way to put it in a box. So people get really caught up in this idea of classical education. This is why I think Charlotte Mason is so much more in line with living active classical education than what is like the ages and stages model where I don't know if that's what you're meaning, where they say, well, the grammar stage is for memorization. You
Uh,
memorize all this stuff. And
right.
then you have the logic stage and then you have the rhetoric. That isn't at all how classical education would have been taught in the past. And Charlotte Mason says we never want to memorize things for the sake of memorization. Like if your 3-year-old knows all the bones in the body, or he can say all the chemical elements, that really is nonsense to him. And you're really teaching him to be puffed up and
Yeah.
prideful and to think he knows something when he doesn't know something. Whereas our education should not puff us up. It should humble us. And we should be, my child, me, you, every day we wake up and we don't know stuff. And we're going to go, what can I learn today? Not, look how cool I am. I know more than these other people. I have this classical education. I've seen so much damage done to kids in this puffing up thing where instead of the child humbly coming to things, you puff them up with all these lists that are so irrelevant to
Yeah.
anything, honestly.
Yeah. And kids are obviously very like, they're sponges. They obviously have a very high recall and
Oh,
capacity
yeah.
for memorization. So, I mean, you put a list of anything in front of a 6-year-old and you go through it with some music, like they're going to have that memorized in, no time flat. It's not only a question of like, are they capable of
Oh,
memorization?
they
It's
are
like,
capable. That's
yeah,
why people do it, but all that time you're spent memorizing, like, say, those chemical elements, which they're not gonna need for 5, 6, 7 more years, they're not hearing the building blocks of stories. They're not getting the rich language. The grammar stage is really what Stratford Caldecott says, and if you wanna read a really good book on classical education, his book, Beauty in the Word. What a wonderful book on classical education. The grammar stage is for remembrance. And what do we remember? We remember the past. We remember the words. We remember the language. We do stories. We do Bible verses, Bible stories, fairy tales, beautiful poetry. The way I look at memorization at that age is we're going to say it over and over again, and it's going to be in our heart. It doesn't matter if some of us get it word perfect and some of us don't, because that's how it's always going to be. Some of your kids are going to boom, they're going to know something immediately, and others are still going to have it in their heart for when they need it. But it's going to be a little bit less. My grandson the other day, we had morning time on the computer. We've been doing it once a week. And he said, Cece, I think I already memorized that poem you've been saying to me because you said it so many times. I've said it 3 times. And I said, yeah. He said, I wasn't even trying to memorize it. I said, yeah, that's how it works. You just hear these words and your mind begins to work on them. You don't even have to explain them, because when your child has a puzzle in their head, just like you, the mind takes over and starts puzzling it out and thinking about it. And you might go to bed one night. I've had this happen many times and wake up the next morning and go, oh my goodness, that's what that poem meant. And that's another area where mom can overteach. She can take away all the mystery and take away all the joy of their letting their own minds do the work.
yeah. I want to tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Foundation Worldview. I absolutely love Foundation Worldview curriculum, and I use it with my own children in our homeschool. My girls and I, for the last year, have been slowly working our way through the comparative worldview curriculum, and I have been truly blown away by the advances and understanding that my girls have shown in their grasp on theology and even other worldviews. For instance, recently they were filling out a worldview map in one of the lessons, and my 9-year-old accurately described on her own with no help postmodernism, Islam, new spirituality, and naturalism. I don't know that I could have perfectly done that myself before this curriculum, but we've been doing it together and learning side by side. I am just so thankful that my girls at such a young age are getting an introduction to our worldview, which of course they're steeped in all the time through our homeschool, church, Bible reading, all of that, but then also comparing and contrasting that to what other people believe. It's giving them an awareness for the reality that our worldview is not the only one that is out there, and we have to learn to discern the difference between not just wrong and right, but right and almost right. I am so thankful for this curriculum. It has been a huge blessing in my life as a mom, and I know it's going to bless my girls for years and years to come, because they will look back on these days that they learned about other people's worldview, and when they encounter it in real life, it will not be the first time they've encountered it. I don't think we can stress how important it is that our children feel prepared and equipped for what they're going to face out in the real world. So that is the most honest review I could give you for Foundation Worldview. It is helping my own kids and is helping me feel equipped to teach them and train them. Learn more at foundationworldview.com and use code Kindled10 to get $10 off a family license of any Foundation Worldview curriculum. That's foundationworldview.com with code Kindled10 for $10 off. Man, That's so true. And poetry is one I didn't really grow up reading, but I am using it with my girls because of all the reasons you're saying. It's almost like I'm doing it because people that I respect and trust say to do it, even if I don't see the fruit or the result yet, right? It's like I'm not 100% sure how this works. I just think it's a good idea. So I'm just doing it
It is a
and
good idea.
sticking with it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's how we learn. Metaphor is how we communicate. You can't learn you describe anything without bringing something else in because there's just no way to do it. So to learn to be that comfortable with metaphor just by playing with words and even nursery rhymes, it doesn't have to be like deep poetry. It can be, you know, Humpty Dumpty.
Yes. That was something that I learned from some episode you did, I can't recall which one, but it about fairy tales and, American tall tales, and so I bought those books from thrift books, and we've been going through those kind of slowly, and Aesop's Fables, and it's like I tend to be the type that's like, we gotta learn all of the official information that is super important, and I would like those would be low priority for me, if ever,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
so it's almost re-educating myself about what actually this stage is meant for, and that foundation, like you've said, and remembrance, and what are they gonna.
Yes, having that foundation of language, understanding how words work and how we communicate with one another, that is all learned by osmosis.
So what about science? I mean, I know that nature study is a really big deal with Charlotte Mason. Science, if there's one subject we could just never do again, it'd be, for me, it would be science. I really don't love it. I've already bought one giant science textbook that has been put in the basement, and I was like, what was I thinking? Like, I got, Apologia Ocean Science or something. It was like a inch and a half thick book on just underwater animals in the ocean, and I started it when my girls were 3rd and 1st grade, and it was like, this is way too in depth for these ages. Like, we don't need to know that level yet. And so then I backed way off, and now they do a co-op one day a week where science is covered. So I've kind of left that to the co-op for the time being. But what are your thoughts on how to approach science?
Well, we were kinda weak in science in our family too. I mean, we were great with nature study.
Hmm.
And, then later, of course, I always felt guilty. We did the Apologia, the big books, the biology and the chemistry. And I would say we picked up some vocabulary along the way. But I did find, like, one of my sons, if you go take math into the sequence, when he graduated, he became kind of a mathematician. When we had had a dismal math. I think I could do better now with math because there's more information and there's more beautiful math programs out there than there were when I was doing it. And I was afraid of math. And now feel like I could, oh, I wish I could do that again. But this son went on to college. A couple of my sons went on and did calculus, and they were fine. When the time came, they were able to overcome that deficiency. And I think as you give your children a broad and generous curriculum over many long years, we know they're going to have some holes in their curriculum, but we also know that whatever they decide to do, that it really isn't going to be a problem. They're going to be able to go, they're not going to have lost time. They're going to be okay. And they're going to be able to quickly make up the difference.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. So I don't have to panic about that.
Well, I'll tell you one more thing to make you feel better. So my youngest son went to public school and he had a very good biology teacher, and things were going great. And I thought, finally, somebody in our family is getting a proper science. Well, she got pregnant and left in November, and they didn't hardly get through the rest of the book the entire time, but they all got a biology credit. And I thought, well, they did just about as well as we did. And yet all these kids went on, and, I'm not saying we should do it poorly. I'm just saying, number one, we want to try to concentrate as much as we can on narrative language and getting books that they can understand, but that are well written, not just here's the information. Because it's hard for us to hold on to the information. The more we can clothe our science in a living narrative, the better we'll be. And then vocabulary is very important in science. And sometimes for me, it was just like, well, if you can study the vocabulary, maybe that'll help you later.
Yeah, yeah, that's helpful. So another thing I want to circle back to is morning time. Now, I know that you are like the quintessential morning time lady. Like, you developed it, right? This is your birth idea, I guess, of your homeschool career. And so what exactly is it, and how did you see that benefit your children throughout their homeschool days?
So when I first read Susan Schaefer Macaulay's book For the Children's Sake, then I had a 5-year-old at the time and I thought, I want to do this stuff, but I don't know how to do it. So it was actually just an idea from her book working out in my life. Like I didn't have Ambleside Online. I didn't have Charlotte Mason's volumes yet. So I started to just say, well, we could do your Awana verse, in the morning. Oh, and while we're here, why don't we sing a song? And also let's do some nursery rhymes. And I started reading chapter books to him at 5. And by the time he was 6, we had read like 30 chapter books. He was a pretty smart kid. And they weren't hugely, they were like Childhood of Famous Americans or We Were There books or the Story of books. So we read all those books. We had such a good time. And I just at that point started adding things to it until it was a morning. And then I realized later that Charlotte Mason herself never said anything about morning time. And of course, it got called morning time because I would say, come on, let's go do morning time. And then that became the name that we called it. And people call them all kinds of things. It's not it's such a organic, natural thing to do that it's not like I created it. Honestly, it probably came a little bit out of the fact that my parents were very disciplined as far as having their devotions every morning, and I'd always see them having their devotions. So when I was an adult, you know, I thought, I'm an adult, I'm going to have my devotions now. And I started that habit, and it's really a string of habits. That's what morning time is, but it's adds up over a many, many long years. You were saying how you came to homeschooling here later. And really, honestly, I really hope my book, Morning Time, A Liturgy of Love, when COVID happened and we had a lot of influx of new homeschoolers, I was hoping that that book would give some of them at least a vision that it didn't have to be just like school at home, that
Yeah.
there were living ideas out there and we could introduce them to our children and repair our own education in the process.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's the difference between, kind of sitting down at the table and everyone burying their noses in their own book, right? And like we're all in our own world. We're not interacting with each other. We're kind of isolated, similar
Right.
to how you are in the classroom. You're kind of isolated in your own worksheet or your own place on the test, whatever it is. And morning time is we're all like you guys are looking at mom, or maybe you're playing and listening to mom, but you're present. We're all present together and you're
Mhm.
listening to read alouds, right? And so what would be like a few examples of a book that a mom might read in morning time with her kids?
Well, you can pick a history spine if you wanted to read it, or you can just like I always end in morning time with a fun book like Huckleberry Finn or Little House on the Prairie or what are I'm trying to think of some of the Caddy Woodlawn. There's so many really Henry Huggins, not Henry Huggins. I'm thinking of what's the funny guy. Anyway, the McCloskey books. Robert McCloskey has some chapter books that are really good. Some of the Marguerite Henry books. Any book that I have a whole list in Mere Motherhood of read alouds, and I also have a whole list in Morning Time, A Liturgy of Love of books we actually read over many long years. So there are a lot of them, but that was plotting. Like if you look back and say, oh my goodness, how could you have read all those books? It was like, well, I just read a little bit this day, a little bit the next day, a little bit the next day, and it added up. So, I think every family, as long as your children are at home, I think they benefit from at least some time of reading aloud as a family because then you have a family culture where you all remember when Laura did that or remember oh, what you're such a puddle glum. Narnia, those are great books for read aloud. So you have these family Winnie the Pooh, you start with Winnie the Pooh.
We're
It's
reading that and we love it
yes,
so much. It's so
it's
fun.
so wonderful, and all ages love that. I mean, if you have a teenager in the other room and you're reading Pooh, he's gonna come in and say, "Oh, I love that."
Yeah,
He's gonna
it's
remember.
Do you love having your nails done but hate going to the nail salon? The strong toxic fumes, sitting there for an hour, paying 75 plus dollars for something that will only last a couple weeks? Well, I gave that up years ago when I found Bubble Pop Club. Bubble Pop Club are low tox nails that you do in the comfort of your own home. Bubble Pop Club sells both nail wrap stickers and gels that you cure using a UV light. My personal favorite are the gels, and I try to keep them on my nails at all times because they help my nails grow out so well. So if my nails are short and ugly, Bubble Pop Club gels are the answer. Ditch the salon, save so much money, and get your time back. My favorite way to do my nails is after the kids go to bed, I'll bring my nail box down, turn on a show or a podcast episode I'm listening to, and in 30 minutes or less, boom, a beautiful gel manicure. This weekend, I even did my nails in a hurry in about 15 minutes, and that is a gel manicure in 15 minutes, about 30 minutes before people arrived at our house for a Christmas party. Check out Bubble Pop Club nails and use my code Haley15 to save 15% at checkout. That's code Haley15 at bubblepopclub.com. It's so fun. It's like so fun as a parent to, I mean, I never read these as a kid. So to read them as an adult is really fun. And then seeing the looks on your kids' faces when they're just like, in wonder at the silliness of the story or how things are unfolding, and they're just like that's so it brings them back to children, and they are children,
Yeah.
but sometimes you look at them more. I mean, we all kind of want to hold our kids to high expectations, and we expect a lot out of them, but then it helps you see them for what they are. Like, they're still just children being like amazed by the beauty of the world and the special friendships that can be created, and it's fun to see that on their faces.
Yeah.
And so one other question that came to mind, this might be getting in the weeds, but with morning time, was it more important to you to kind of hit, let's say you had 5 books that you wanted to hit in morning time. Are you reading a chapter of every book, or is it more about just a few pages here, a few pages there, that sort of thing?
Yeah, usually the fun book we read at the end of morning time, I would read a whole chapter because, math is next and everybody's like sitting there in rapture with the story because they don't want to go do their math. But before that, I just read a little bit of each thing, whatever I'm reading. A little, I read a few science books aloud during morning time. Like, I read Science Matters aloud, just a little bit of it, because your mind isn't going to hold on to that much more of it than a history. Maybe the chapter in the book is really long. I would not read the whole chapter. Plutarch, sometimes you just read a couple paragraphs. That's about all you can handle. So it doesn't have, you're doing a little bit of a lot. Like Shakespeare, if you decide to read Shakespeare in your home, you can read it once. So there's 5 acts in a Shakespeare play, and each act has several scenes. So you can read a scene a day. Some of the scenes are really long. You might read a part of a scene, and that way eventually you'll get through the whole play. And you don't have to have an end point. Like, I mean, you do if you make a plan and you have it in writing and you're going to do it. But if you're just plodding along each day, then when you're done, you're done. Sometimes it helps to have an endpoint because, pushes you a little bit, like, I'm not gonna do anything today, but no, if we finish that, we'll be on schedule. That can help.
Okay, that's helpful. I will say, I got these books called Shakespeare for Children. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's like I don't know, modified or shorter little versions of it, I think. And there's little fun illustrations that were written by kids and drawn. So we did Romeo and Juliet. They loved it, like totally loved it. And then we started Hamlet, and nobody had any clue what was going on, including me. And so I was like, okay, we're putting this away. I can't even handle it. And it might have just been the day. I don't know, but I did not even get it. And so what do you do in that situation? Am I stupid? Like, what do I do if I don't understand, and I'm not exactly sure how to help them understand if I don't even know what's going on?
Right. Well, there are some things that maybe you should just put away for now and then come back to it later. Don't give up on it, but maybe give it time and maybe do a different play, Midsummer Night's Dream or The Tempest. Those are 2 that are more accessible to children, I think, but I wouldn't feel too badly.
Hope is not lost. You're good.
I guess you edit these.
Yes, I do. Yes. Okay, let's see. I'll only ask a couple more, I'm sure. We're we're at like 48 minutes. Okay, so let's talk about progressivism in homeschooling. We've talked a little bit about progressive education being packaged as classical literature, but obviously you're well aware that homeschooling is no longer just conservative Christians, and it hasn't been for a long time. But when I was growing up, that was all that I was aware of, and all of my friends who were homeschooled went to church with me or to neighboring churches, and all of our co-ops were just, our church friends, really. And today it's quite different. And I was actually I tried to kind of get plugged into like a local homeschool field trip group, and it was like within my county, and went to some events. But on the Facebook page, even the conversation that was happening on that page, I was like, wait, what? Like I was honestly kind of shocked and a little bit culture shocked as, again, a newer homeschool mom, that I can't presume that the majority of homeschoolers or whoever I run into that homeschools anymore is necessarily a Christian. And so with that shift, I think we've obviously seen a ton of the curriculum rise to meet that need and to appeal to a secular audience. So I'm curious, as someone who's been homeschooling or was homeschooling a long time ago and have watched that progressive change in the homeschool culture, what are the concerns that you have had as you've seen that shift occur?
Yeah, wow, that's a big question. First of all, yes, I think you start to see buzzwords like people who have agendas, so to speak. Like you said, classical education. I'm talking about Charlotte Mason education. And we might think, well, those are old forms and they're not going to be affected by progressive ideas, but that isn't true because really they become advertising terms. So not everything that says it's classical is classical, and not everything that says it's Charlotte Mason and is certainly not Charlotte Mason. I think what we have to see, number one, is that I feel like it comes down to language, and this is where the battle is. And this is why I think poetry is so important. I think having our children understand what words mean and how they mean it, and that this comes through osmosis, is so important because we have people constantly trying to bait and switch their ideas with language. They use guilt, they use manipulation, and we don't have to feel guilty because our language is English, for instance. All our children in all the English speaking world, there's nothing to be ashamed of, and we should know the very best of our language. Language is not a race. It is, and I mean by race as racial. It is. It is for all of us who speak this language. It's in our best interest to read the very, very best of how our language has been used and how beautiful it is, and the ideas and the freedom that have come from this wonderful language that we have. And I see a lot of attacks on families because of guilt, making the family feel guilty, the mom feel guilty, and this curriculum is going to be more diverse. And it's not education at all. It's just a bait and switch and you fall for it because you feel guilty. You don't want to be a racist. You don't want to be someone who doesn't love other people. And as a Christian, we do. We want to love other people. We want to love. We aren't better. Nobody's better. This person isn't better. That person isn't better. But ideas matter because ideas have consequences, and consequences in turn produce bad ideas. Some bad ideas, as my friend Dawn likes to say, have victims.
Mhm.
And when you have a culture of victimhood, it behooves everyone to go back and see a time. Like C.S. Lewis said, why do we read old books? Because we're breathing the air that we're in right now. And we can't see outside of that in some way. So we get outside. Old books help us to remember, for instance, maybe what masculinity we were talking about earlier. What did that look like in the 90s? What did it look like in the 90s? What did it look like in Roman times? What did it look like? And it gives us a more rounded picture of what these concepts meant at different times. The word freedom, what does that mean? Well, you can go all the way back to the Greeks to find out. Well, you can go to the Egyptians and say, this is a slave culture. And then you can look at the Ten Commandments and see, here are a group of people coming out of a slave culture. And what does God do? He gives them the Ten Commandments. Now, we don't think of commandments as free things. We think of commandments as shackles. But God was freeing Israel from the philosophy of slavery to the philosophy of truth and goodness
Yeah.
and beauty. And those were, what a slave has to work every day. A slave has to work. He has no choice about working. A free person has a day off where he can worship because he's made in the image of God. He worships God. So if you look at those commandments, or you look at that, that's just one concept of freedom that we in our culture, when we say the word, everybody thinks certain things, all kinds of weird stuff. But if you look at it historically, that's not how it worked at all.
Right, right. That's great. Yeah, bringing some context into because I think that's the height of man's hubris and pride is thinking kind of we are all that there is, and this moment is all that there is, right? And we've become so unanchored in even knowing our own history as a culture, as the church, that you are so susceptible to false teaching if you don't know history.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say what you said about being anchored. That's such an important word. But the Bible says don't remove the ancient landmarks that your father have set up. What happens is we're so busy right now in this culture of progressivism that we're removing these landmarks right and left, right and left. And then one day you wake up and you go, oh, that's why that was there. But now you can't put it back. So it is very, very important before you tear something down. And so many people are, even in homeschooling, even in Charlotte Mason, are intent on tearing down the ancient landmarks. And before you join them, you should ask yourself, what was this landmark here for?
I learned firsthand as this week the importance of what we were talking about earlier with history and reading living books because we have a survey of history book that we've been going through. So far, I thought it was really solid. It is written from a Christian worldview, and it's been pretty. I thought it was good. I'm no expert, but I did a four-year worldviews course in high school, so I have like a solid understanding, I think, of most history, but lots of gaps, like everyone does. And so we're reading it, and actually, I think I was talking on Instagram with someone about it because I asked a question about it, and someone shared with me that when in our book gets to Islam or gets to Muhammad, the prophet of Islam of Allah, that the book describes him as a peaceful man who just wanted to live his life in peace. And I was like, we haven't gotten there yet. I instantly, my antenna went up. I was like, wait, what? Wait, that's how we're talking about Muhammad as he's just like a peaceful, peace-loving man, even though he created one of, the number two world religion that's a false religion that is obviously anything but peace. And was just like, wow, I mean, that is exactly why we need to be reading source materials. And because even now, that's one thing I know that's not true. So I can supplement when we get to that, for instance, with other books or just my own knowledge and of like, hey, this religion actually is not peaceful. Here's what they teach. Here's what he believed. He married a 9-year or a 6-year-old and consummated the marriage. Like, who knows how much I'll be willing to tell my kids about some of these things because it's honestly very demonic and dark. But
Right.
that was something where I knew that was false, but then it made me think, well, what about the other lessons that I may not know? I don't know all of the things that we're learning. Some of these things I'm learning more about it. It's a topic I've heard of, but I don't know a ton about it. And it opened my eyes in a way that nothing has yet to that reality of, wow, I need to be on guard, and I need to be aware that anyone retelling history has that potential, even a Christian, to inject error, really.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, like a source book, you can understand that not everything you read in like a living book is absolute truth, right? Because we're reading people's perceptions of history or descriptions of
Right.
things, but it helps us because it doesn't give you the idea that like this is God's truth. This is just one person's perspective. Whereas when we read that history survey, we think this is the truth, you know?
Right. That's a very good point. So the thing that I think is dangerous is that a lot of these books become debunkers. Wendy Capehart used to say when dealing with history, it's heroes first. And there are a lot of people trying to tear apart the heroes to take them away, to say they weren't perfect. As Christians, we know that our heroes were sinners. There was not only one person who didn't sin, thank goodness, because he's offered us salvation through his blood. In history, we don't have any heroes that don't have feet of clay. But when you concentrate, especially when your children are younger and they're reading these stories and they're debunking all these people, it is so dangerous to teach our children to always be negative and to be debunkers. We want to fill them with truth, with goodness, and with beauty. We don't want to fill them with this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, or these people weren't good, these people weren't who they said they were. This guy had slaves, this guy had this guy had that. And we had very, very careful about it. There's a time and a place to eventually say, here's where he was, but we don't start there. We don't start with tearing down. We start with building. That's why Charlotte Mason is about synthesis, putting together. Later, when our kids are older, then they begin to analyze a little bit, and that's good. Analyzation is good, but it is also something we wanna be very careful about, especially with history. So heroes first, and then later, we can start, you know, kinda letting them know what's going on with some of these things. But yeah,
So,
that kind of I
do you
would
view that
definitely.
as a like a backwards approach then, for instance, in this history book that you're going through a survey of history, you're gonna hit a lot of negative things along with positive, like some really terrible stories and then some heroes of the faith. And you're gonna read about Paul's missionary journey and you're gonna read about this Jewish revolt where hundreds of people died. Would you say that's like the downside or the detriment? That would you say that's a negative or a liability to our children to read history in that way? If we should be
Yeah,
doing
be
heroes first?
careful that they have the stories first. Like, maybe it's okay, like, they're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. They're starting to hear, these bad things happen because history is really the history of a lot of bad things, sort of. But you wanna make sure they also have the heroes and the stories and the good foundation in that, and there are a lot of little books for those younger kids that are just stories of. I mean, my son and I always laugh. I mean, he had that history. He had that foundation of those biographies that we read when he was little, and it did it. They didn't glorify the person, but they uplifted the person as Daniel Boone or Francis Marion or some of these people. And no, that isn't the whole story, but that is the beginning of history, that men did great deeds.
Yeah, I've seen that critique even with Little House on the Prairie that, well, Laura didn't tell the whole story. There was some, there was some negative things that happened in the journey that aren't, captured in the books, or Ma struggled with depression or something. And there was, I guess, a book a few years back that was written that kind of sought to expose like the other side of the story or something. I didn't read it, but I just kind of overheard that this happened, and it kind of is like what you're saying. Well, maybe that's because Laura was writing to children and she didn't think the children needed to engage with her mother's postpartum depression as 7-year-olds. Maybe she was actually like protecting and looking out for them, realizing that just because something isn't put in the books, that's not necessarily a negative. It actually might be a blessing of that the culture where we protect children, we look out for them, and we give them what they can handle at that age.
Absolutely. I get really sad when I hear stuff like that because so many people are either they're not reading those books or they're reading them and they're moralizing, a lot about that from our perspective, which Ma didn't have our perspective, and misunderstanding that the subtleties of the book is another thing. Like, there is a give and take between Ma and Pa in those books. So Pa was building relationships with these people, and Ma was terrified of them. Well, Ma was terrified, and we might have been terrified in that situation also. It's not about, we don't have to debunk her. That's where we're starting to tear things down. If you're constantly reading books and tearing them
She was a
down,
racist, yeah.
you're not helping your children learn to think on their own and understand. You're trying. The sad thing about that is you can force feed that debunking to your kids, but you're not going to help them in the long run. If you create debunkers out of your children, it's going to come back to haunt you, and it's not going to be pleasant. So I'm just like, you don't read a story I don't know why people think they have to read a story and think this has gotta mirror back to me everything I already think and say. Why? Why does this story have to do that? Like, that's not what this story is. You tell your story if you think you need that. But this story is this story, and it's told this way.
Yeah. Well, because we live in a culture of narcissists and we all want to see ourselves reflected in everything, right? And if it's not exactly what we believe, then now we have to do the hard work of engaging with that idea and people do not know how to think. So,
Right,
I think
right.
that
That's a good
might
point.
have something to do with it. So, final thoughts, Cindy, I would love to hear just your encouragement for the discouraged homeschool mom who's listening, who's like, I am weary, I'm tired, this is hard. I don't know if I want to keep going. What would you say to that woman?
Well, I say this a lot in my stuff, but there's a poem by Christina Rossetti called Uphill, and it says, "Does the road go uphill all the way?" And it goes, "Yes, to the very end." Sometimes when things are hard or when the road is hard, we think something's wrong, like we wanna spend money, we wanna fix it, we wanna do what we can, and sometimes it's not necessarily a problem. It's just that these things take courage and they take strength and they take resilience and grit. And those are the kind of things that doing something valuable is going to call us to. It's going to be hard and we're going to walk that uphill road. And when we get to the end of the uphill road, we're going to turn around and we're going to see that vista, that beautiful vista before us, the valleys, all the things. And we're going to say, look what God hath wrought. This is me. I was just trudging up this hill every single day, and it seemed so hard. But now I had no idea. The Bible says, eye has not seen, and ear has not heard what God has prepared for his people. And it says, do not think it's some strange thing that something is hard. That does not mean something's wrong. It just means that that's where we live in this world right now. And to do something valuable sometimes puts a bit of a target on our back. And it is hard. And it's hard to be a one income family. And it's hard to live in this culture in the way that it's set up where it isn't encouraging to moms. It isn't showing moms that there is value in the work they're doing. And I just want to say that what you're doing is extremely valuable. The fruit is way down the road. You're not going to see it today and you're not going to see it tomorrow. You're going to have to walk in faith to the point where someday you look and say, look what God has done. And, take cheer that God is at work and that the work you're doing is important and your children are important. And you can't do any worse than the school system. And I say that as someone who, put my son in school for a while. You really, if you're reading books together as a family, you have no idea the lasting benefit that is going to have. And you're just plodding along, doing what you can day in and day out. So I wish I could give everybody a big hug and just say, it's going to be okay. There is a reward coming. It's just going to take a while.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you so much. Where can people find you online, your Patreon, podcast, all that?
Yeah, we have our podcast is The New Mason Jar, and you can find that at thenewmasonjar.com. And my Patreon is just www.patreon.com/Cindy Rollins. There I do a lot of just discipleship. We have a lot of fun there. And yeah, I'm on Facebook. We have a Facebook page called Mere Motherhood. We're pretty active, crazy place.
Well, I'll link all of that in the show notes so people can find that. But thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing what you've learned along the way with us younger moms, because we need the encouragement, and it's just a blessing to have someone a little bit ahead of us to remind us to keep going uphill. And that's not a bad thing that you're headed uphill, right? Because you're going to get to see that beautiful view at the top. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.